morning, everyone. I'm Simona De Rosa from the Institute. I'm a researcher. I'm working in the fields of creative and cultural industries and the media ecosystem, basically working on the evaluation of the impact of the domain. And I'm with an institute partner of the Möbius project, where I also take care of the impact assessment of the project. And I'm very happy today to start this discussion about book publishing in the age of the platforms. Before we start, just let me say something about the agenda. So I will give you some details about the Möbius project. So in order to start the discussion, but after me, we will have a keynote of Gianpaolo Scacco from the European Commission about regulatory development in digital policies. And after the keynote, we will have some food for thoughts to step into a panel who will be moderated by Professor Christoph Blasi, who will moderate a session that will touch different aspects together with Olivier Brahe, Quentin de Chenelier, and Alexandre Stan. And after we will hear about this presentation, there will be some time for question and answer, moderated by Professor Blasi, and then it will be me and Christoph again to wrap up the session and provide some conclusion. Just let me say that you have the chat available always, so feel free to put your questions even during the panelist speech, so we can collect your question, but no problem if you forgot something or something else rise up into your mind. You will also have the time to raise your hands and provide directly the question to the speakers during the Q&A session. Some other disclaimer I have to do is about privacy policy. So the session will be recorded. You will find it out, the recording on YouTube, on Möbius website, and on our social media channels. So you have already accepted the privacy policy, but if you don't want to appear in the video, please turn off your camera. And as usual, please try to keep your mic mute while the speakers speak. Another quick disclaimer I have to do is about gender issue. It sounds strange, but it's very important. This time we have a panel, except for me, all made by men. This was not intentional. The original agenda was full of brilliant women colleagues, but at the end of the day, it was not possible for them to join us. So we have men, but I can assure you that the Möbius project is very well balanced in terms of gender, since from the coordinator until the partner. So don't worry about that. So I think I've done all the important housekeeping things. So I would like also to provide you a brief understanding of the Möbius project for the ones that are not familiar with. So the Möbius project is funded by the Horizon 2020 framework, and the aim is to reshape a bit the traditional value chain of the publishing sector. And this is done through both technology and research in terms of business models, so new technologies, but also new business models. The project started in March 2021 and will end in February 2024, so we are still in the mid-run of our project. We started at the beginning with this point in mind, that book publishing is the largest cultural industry in Europe. So this is already a very relevant fact that deserves high attention. But with a strong team of researchers working already at European level with a common interest and worries around CCIs, we also started thinking during the COVID on how also the world sector, but also the publishing sector needed more attention. And actually, it was also because we were a bit frustrated by little attention on CCI in the Horizon 2020 calls. So we working hardly in writing a proposals about books, and in particular about user-driven books. That was the main challenge. So with these preliminary things in mind, we created a consortia very heterogeneous in terms of um, skills and competencies. So we have on board uh, expert on publishing, on digital media, but of course also tech people and people that are able to take care about IP policy and do research based on Living Labs approach, a user-driven research. And with these skills, we put together a consortium of 11 partners located in 4 European countries, Italy, Spain, Germany, and Belgium. And this is the list of our consortia. And you will see in a while that some of our speakers actually are part of the consortium. So, what was the challenge we had in mind? First of all, as said, renovating the publishing sector, providing a new approach, a new paradigm based on the figure of the prosumer. So, the key figure of someone that is able to produce content and also consume the same content, of course, having in mind to create a fair and sustainable ecosystem, an improved, let's say, ecosystem for the publishing sector, taking into consideration also the immersive or enriched media experience that technology can provide to the publishing to go a step further. So basically, just to go deep and up to the point of the Mobius innovation, what we are doing at the moment is to create 3 different innovation. The first one is called the Prosumer Intelligence Toolkit. The second one is a new prosumer business model. And finally, the Mobius book. But let's have a quick look at those tools. So the Prosumer Intelligence Toolkit, it's a digital method based on computational social science that will allow us to understand more deeper the global prosumer communities, extracting knowledge that at the moment we are not able to collect. And in particular, knowledge that the publishers at the moment are not able to collect in a way that will be very interactive because we will provide a data visualization dashboard, very user friendly, that will allow also the publishers in reshaping the business models according to the new data that we will be able to extract from internet. The second innovation is about business model. And the aim of the project is to explore and understand business potential, of course, based on IP and copyright law, thanks to the combination of revenue and monetization model. And finally, the aim is to produce a so-called Mobius book, which is a software. And actually, these are 2 softwares. One for the creative professional, for the producers, and for writers, in order to create a cross-media experience around the book, also based on 3D audio. And the other software would be for the readers, in order to let them play with the book in a different way that would be much more interactive and immersive. And one of the key point is also to explore other other reading behaviors in terms of more social experience and not an individual one anymore. It's important to stress that all those innovations are very much focused and based on user feedback. So together with IMEC Institute, IMEC, then Institute, and all, we are creating workshop and living labs activities in order to always have on board during all the pilot phases since the beginning until the very end, readers and writers. If you want to join, this is the QR code. You can scan it, and it will be a pleasure for us to have you on board for our next activities. I mentioned it at the beginning also the immersiveness of the experience that we want to provide. And indeed, all the Mobius book will become an immersive experience. we will translate two texts. One that was already defined into the proposal, The Influence of the Blue, of Giulio Ravizza, and the other is a fantasy that we have selected through an open call launched in March 2022. And those two texts will become a Möbius book experience, both in the reader, so in a software on all our mobile phone, but also through a mobile book box. So an experience that will be portable, and we will allow to engage even more users through this box where the books will be sent out, and a big art installation that will be hosted by Kunstkraftwerk, one of the partners of the project. So these are the main things about Möbius. Some of those topics will be reflected into the presentation of our speakers. But before that, let me introduce the panel of today. As said, first of all, we will have Gianpaolo Scacco, Senior Policy Officer at the European Commission with a legal background, and he's really working on a regulatory aspect in EU digital policy, such as copyright, audiovisual media, and e-commerce legislation. Professor Blasi is Professor for Publishing Studies at Johannes Gutenberg University in Germany, and he is an expert of book economy and management, as well as digital publishing. And Professor Blasi will moderate, as said, our session. Then we will have Quentin de Sandelier, legal advisor of the Federation of European Publishers. Federation of European Publishers, as you have seen, is one of the partners of the project, and Quentin takes part in the advocacy efforts of the publisher at European level for the European policies, in particular about copyright, digital, and platform regulation files. After that, we will have Olivier Baer, senior researcher at the Guberna, with a focus on good corporate governance and digital markets. But Olivier is also a former colleague in Möbius, because before that he was a senior researcher in IMEX Smith Institute, and he was also engaged into the Möbius project. And last but not least, we will have Alexandru Stan, leading the research and innovation project in IM2, and is the tech guy here with a technical background in electrical engineering and software engineering, and the project is really in the core of development of the Prosumer Intelligence Toolkit and the Möbius book. So this is the list. This is what we have on the menu. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Scacco. And first of all, I want to thank you for being here. We know that your work on the topic is very meaningful for us, and we are happy that you can be here to somehow provide some information during your speech that will be then worked around the panel. So I really want to welcome Gianpaolo. I leave you the floor, tell you to learn more about regulation in the digital area.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction and also for the information on the project, which is very interesting indeed also for us, because as you know, there are different programs which cater for the needs of the cultural and creative sector. It's not only the dedicated Creative Europe program that we manage in our culture department, so it's very interesting to see the unfolding of this project. And thank you for your invitation to providing, let's say, sort of overview of the regulatory developments in digital policies that are relevant for the issue that is the focus of your workshop today. So the relationships between book publishing and online platforms, because I come, as you mentioned in your introduction, from the Culture Policy Department, so which is the responsible for policies in the cultural area, but we do contribute also to work streams which relate to the shaping and implementation of legislation relevant to our overarching, let's say, overall policy priority, which is that of promoting a favorable environment for creators and creative sectors. And so in this context, the issue of the relations between cultural industries like book publishing and online platform is a crucial aspect and fits actually into one of the political priorities of the present Commission for the digital policy agenda, which is a fair digital environment, notably through a level playing field with online platform, because indeed online platform have become an integral part of people's and businesses' daily lives, and this development has been accelerated actually through the digitalization push prompted by the pandemic crisis. And online platforms indeed bring several benefits to society and the economy, including the fact of being key enablers of digital trade by increasing consumer choice and convenience, improving efficiency and enabling businesses, especially smaller ones, to reach customers also beyond the reach of their home state. But let's say alongside all these opportunities, they do raise also a number of challenges. For example, online platforms have turned out to be a privileged channel through which illegal content can be disseminated online. And in this context, illegal content includes IP infringing content, and this is particularly relevant for an industry like book publishing, which relies on effective copyright protection. But also successful online platforms benefit from considerable economies of scale. Once the number of users grows, so does the amount of data these platforms accumulate over time. And this can lead to a situation where a few platforms can influence the nature of our communications and interactions and become also powerful gatekeepers to market, which they often actually create themselves. So they are determining the rules of the game for accessing to the conditions on these markets. So this allows a highly efficient matching of supply and demand in markets of unprecedented size, and the centralized power of online intermediaries opens the door for different forms of abuse. And book publishers actually have been confronted with challenges in this respect, and the European Commission actually, in its capacity of competition authority at EU level, in recent years has also investigated abusive practices affecting the book sectors, consisting of unfair business conditions in a context of imbalance of bargaining power, coupled with an economic dependency on a service which is a gateway to the market, or abuse of dominant position and risk of weak competition in digital markets. For example, a couple of years ago, investigations were open to look at clauses that Apple imposes on developers for the distribution of apps in app stores, which impose the use of Apple's own proprietary in-app purchase systems, and also restrictions on the ability of developers to inform iPhone and iPad users of alternative, cheaper purchasing possibility outside of apps. And these concern different types of contents, including audiobooks and ebooks. In an earlier case, the Commission had concerns about, for example, the so-called most favored nation or parity clauses imposed by Amazon in its ebook distribution agreements that required publishers to offer Amazon similar or better terms and conditions than those offered to its competitors, or to inform Amazon about more favorable or alternative terms given to Amazon competitors. And these clauses not only covered price, but many aspects that the competitor can use to differentiate itself from Amazon, like an alternative distribution business model, an innovative ebook, a promotion. So the Commission considered these clauses as problematic because they would make more difficult for other ebook platforms to compete with Amazon by reducing publishers and competitors' ability and incentives to develop new and innovative ebooks and alternative distribution services. And finally, Amazon offered commitments to address this concern that after some stages of review were made binding by a commission decision. But now, to address this type of challenges related to the dominant position and bargaining power of a number of digital players, it has become clear that policy intervention are required beyond the remedies that you can, let's say, find on a case-by-case basis through the enforcement of competition law. As a matter of fact, in a way, already under the previous political mandate, EU policymakers started to address this kind of challenges by seeking to correct imbalances in specific problematic areas. And here I would mention a few which are specifically relevant to publishers. So, for example, in the area of copyright, you may know that the EU legal framework of copyright has been upgraded to strengthen the protection of the rights of Europe's creators, and a centerpiece of this legislative endeavor is the directive on copyright in the digital single market adopted in 2019. So this directive has updated the EU copyright rules to fit the way creative works are produced, distributed, and accessed online. And one of the key aspects of this new directive is really the introduction of more legal certainty and more remuneration with online platforms for the commercial exploitation of protected works, rebalancing, in a way, bargaining power. In particular, one of its key provisions, Article 17, sets out a specific liability regime for the use of creative works on online content sharing platforms. This provision has been at the forefront of the implementation efforts since the entry into force of the directive, with the Commission issuing the guidance to support the Member States' implementation in 2021. And this year, actually, this regime also, in a way, withstand the legal challenge that was brought by a member state contesting its validity, because earlier this year in spring, the Court of Justice confirmed actually the validity of these rules. And so now it is for the member states to properly implement the directive, and it is a Commission priority to ensure that this happens so that all stakeholders, including publishers across the EU, can start benefiting from them. But beyond the area of copyright, actually, the EU legislator had also intervened already to regulate in more general terms the relation between business users and online platforms to ensure some kind of fairness. And here I'm referring to the business to platform regulation that was adopted actually in the same year as the copyright directive, and that was a first attempt to give business users that depend on online platform and online search engine to reach consumer some minimum, let's say, transparency and also options for remedy when they face problems, while safeguarding the potential innovation of online platforms. And the adoption of this regulation was accompanied by the setting up of an expert group with capacity of EU Observatory to monitor and analyze the latest trends and issues in the online platform economy. In this context, business players who rely on an online platform can help identify the main issues by sharing their experiences through a dedicated website. And also, the Commission had already intervened to tackle the other challenges that I was mentioning about online illegal content dissemination, because it sought to secure a more effective cooperation of online platforms in this respect by issuing a recommendation outlining measures to design back in 2018. So I would say that we have seen over the years a number of what we would call the building blocks, let's say, on whose basis now, under the current political mandate, we have used that, let's say, to go a step further, one step further, to address it in a more transversal and encompassing way the need to ensure an effective level playing field with digital services. And this has become an even more pressing need since the pandemic crisis, where the cultural sector, as you know, has been heavily affected, and where the different sector players, including book publishers, continue to work, produce, and make available through digital channels their outputs. And so fair trading and transparent business environment online has become also important as a factor for the sector recovery and as a means to expand its opportunity online. And it is in this context that at the end of 2020, the Commission initiated legislation to clarify and upgrade the EU rule book governing the digital space through a set of transversal rules for the regulation of all digital services that operate in the EU, and which has led to the recent adoption of, on the one hand, the Digital Market Acts, and on the other hand, the Digital Services Act. These two new EU regulations complement, in a way, the policy intervention that I briefly recalled so far, to ensure a fair online environment. In particular, the Digital Market Act aims to ensure fair and open digital markets by setting rules for those platforms that precisely act as gatekeepers in the digital world. As I mentioned at the beginning, this can give these platforms the power to act as private rulemakers and be bottlenecks between businesses and end users. And the DMA will precisely prevent gatekeepers from imposing unfair conditions on businesses and users and ensure the openness of important digital services. And this should enable us to tackle practices that have been especially harmful to publishers, for example, when it comes to online services that are both a direct competitor and a distributor, or accessibility to data generated by publishers' activity on the gatekeepers' platforms, or interoperability with the gatekeepers' own services, to just mention a few examples. Now, the DMA, to achieve this objective, establishes a list of do's and don'ts that these gatekeepers will need to implement. And in case of non-compliance, the European Commission will be able to impose fines, which can go up to 10% of a company's total annual turnover, or even 20% in case of repeated infringements. But also, in case of systemic infringements, there could be also structural remedies, for example, selling parts of the business or banning the company from certain new acquisitions, like companies providing, for example, digital services or services enabling the collection of data affected by the systemic non-compliance. And to ensure that the rules are future-proof, the Commission is also empowered to supplement existing obligations based on a market investigation. The other leg of this measure reform that I'm briefly describing is the so-called Digital Services Act, which will tackle the other challenge I was referring to in my at the beginning of my presentation, which is tackling more effectively illegal content online, because the Digital Services Act provides this new transversal framework, which sets out really a frame of specific binding proportionate obligations for digital intermediary services that will be enforced through strengthened supervisory framework, because this is also an important aspect compared to the previous legislative framework. We will have a very robust supervisory and enforcement architecture that will enable us to not only address platforms that are not based in the EU, but also to more effectively sanction compliance failure or non-compliance, and also have a better cross-border cooperation because, of course, the internet does not stop at the borders. And in addition, another key feature of this new framework is that there are specific obligations for very large online platforms and very large search engines, meaning companies whose services reach more than 45 million users, who will have additional obligations that include wide-ranging assessments of the risk for online harms on their services. For example, risk in terms of exposure to illegal content, and the setting up of suitable mitigation measures that will be subject to independent auditing. And in this context, the Commission, the European Commission, will have powers to directly supervise these very large players, and is actually setting up a European Center for Algorithmic Transparency to support this new supervisory role with assessments on the compatibility of the functioning of algorithmic system with the above-mentioned risk management obligations. So this was, let's say, my attempt to give really a snapshot as a, let's say, regulatory background for your discussion in a workshop. Of course, in 20 minutes, I cannot go into further details, but before concluding, I would like to just mention that the two acts that I just described, the DMA and the DSA, have actually entered into force this very month in November, the 1st of November, the DMA, and the 16th of November, the DSA. And so we have just entered actually a very crucial implementation phase, because in the next months, there will be important steps to be taken to really enable the concrete application of these two important regulatory framework, one being for the DMA, the designation of these gatekeeper platforms that will have to comply with this obligation that I have described earlier, and the other will be the designation of the very large platforms and search engines that I've described in relation to the DSA. So on this, I will stop, and I hope that I have provided enough background for your discussion, and I thank you for your attention and wish you a very fruitful workshop discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Scacco. It has been a very interesting and meaningful recall about European efforts to ensure a fairer digital ecosystem. We are aware that the efforts made about copyright, but also above all DSA, DMA, is really brilliant, and all over the world, all over the world, other countries around are looking at us as a very good practices in terms of regulation of those crucial aspects. You touched the point about intermediation and abuse of online platforms, the big one, of course, and this is very relevant also for the publishing. We expect that also with further technological development and also with further work on business model, we could anyway try to provide to the publishers and to the publishing sector a way to mediate a bit also those efforts from this side. So thank you again, and now I leave the floor to Christoph for the introduction and to really enter into the discussion, and see you later. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to give me the honorable task to lead through this workshop. I just try to share my screen. Second.
Yes,
wrong.
we can see your.
But yes, it was the wrong one. Sorry for that.
No problem.
So this is the right one.
Yes.
Okay, when the Möbius project is the sender, which is the case this afternoon, we are talking, as Simona has pointed out, about the opportunities of European publishing, not only but also in times when books do not have to be printed or text and image only. We had heard about the particular focus on enhanced e-books or enhanced digital books of any kind. One of the rationales of a project like Möbius, as you have heard, is that unfortunately the agency of the actors of the European book industry is restricted. So they can't do what they want, and they cannot effectively act as they wish, with the restricting entities primarily being the presence and the thriving of platforms of different kinds interfering with European book economy and culture. For this afternoon, with platforms, we not only mean the so-called double-sided platforms in the narrow sense, where providers and demanders of products or services are mediated and for which the winner takes all logic is inherent. This is the kind of platforms you know, for example, from Airbnb, where, for example, people that look for a holiday flat find Airbnb the more attractive, the more people that have flats offer them. And the other way around, for people that have a flat, it is the more attractive to offer their apartments on Airbnb, the more customers there are. So if this has gone beyond a certain point of a certain level, it probably is very hard to enter this market as a new entrant. But we do not only talk about these kinds of platforms in the academic sense of the word, because even Amazon is not one of those. But we also talk about more general large web outlets that interfere with books and publishing in one or the other way. So as I said, it's not only used for this afternoon. Book trade platforms, used book trade for platforms in the narrow sense, because they are real double-sided platforms, but very centrally, of course, also Amazon as a bookseller and as an ebook provider, which are not double-sided platforms in the narrow sense of the word, but they are still platforms and they are interfering with the fragmented publishing and book world in Europe. And we are also probably also talking, especially if we talk about prosumers, about platforms like, for example, Wattpad, which has a very particular business model. Important values of European-style book culture are, for example, diversity, fragmented structures, spatial ubiquity, sensibility for artistic expression and innovation, etc. It can easily be seen that many of those values are in danger to get compromised by the advance of platforms or large web outlets. The winner-takes-all logic, also known as the St. Matthew's principle, has been mentioned already as one reason why those platforms are really hard to fight. Some of the platforms, however, rather grow just because of their utilitaristic value proposition and their quality of service. Admittedly, I think we have to admit that. Be that as it were, as a fragmented, in a good sense, this is fragmented in a good sense, European book industry, they are hard to come by indeed, these platforms and large web outlets that interfere with the European book culture. To tackle central issues, these are questions to tie up upon. First, why are platforms so successful with their targeted services? Well, provisional answer, because those platforms know so much more about their customers than any single publisher possibly can. Second question, why do creative people with their works of art go to those platforms? Provisional answer, because the platforms support creativity and distribution, give the creatives the stage they want to have. We will in the following discussion, as the core part of this workshop, mainly discuss approaches from, that's how we could call it, the Möbius universe to tackle these issues, i.e. making publishers more competitive in the decisive data realm, I have told you that having the data is one of the success factors of platforms. Secondly, helping publishers to give their customers more attractive opportunities to be creative and participate with own content. This is not limited to, but mainly focused, as you have heard, to content that is put together not only from texts and images, but also other media or other digital elements. So that will be a line of argumentation along the three following contribution. But to frame those things I've just mentioned, we will learn about business model options that are important to know for this discussion. And we will hear, as we have already from Mr. Skako, hear about European legislative measures underway to help book publishers in the age of platforms. So that's my proposal as an introduction. And according to the plan, no, we are not yet with Q&A. It's now the turn of Olivier. Olivier, please take it away.
Thank you very much. So I approach this topic in the Möbius project from the business modeling point of view. As the nice introduction of Simona mentioned, I now work for the Institute for Directors in Belgium, working on better corporate governance for the members of boards. But for 17 years, I worked for the Free University of Brussels, where I left on good terms. So I know a great deal about media economics, and I was deeply involved in this project. So I'm not just an invited external speaker. So when thinking about business modeling and book publishing, we all know that book publishing is a very complicated business. Publishers have to make all sorts of choices, from selecting the authors, then guiding the author to a good final product, a good book, fiction or non-fiction, and then all the technical choices that have to be made in terms of typesetting and the layout, and if it's digital books, enrichment. But from business modeling, we really simplify the challenges that publishers face. And in its starkest terms, the simplification goes as follows. So there are two choices that publishers constantly have to make when selling their books through the retail market. So I'm only going to focus on the retail channel, not business to business or educational books. But I do take into account the platform markets and online markets that are basically unignorable in this day and age. So the first choice that all publishers have to make is, how are they going to earn money from their books? And in online markets, there are two basic ways of earning money. Or you ask cash directly from the end consumer. You ask them to pay 20 euro for a book. This is the traditional model. Or you earn indirect revenues. Then a third party pays so that the end user can consume the media for free. And this is the advertising-based model. So the third party is the advertiser. There are other cases where the third party is the government. In online, in video, for example, in TV, you have public broadcasting, and then the government pays for money. But also in book publishing, you have libraries who offer books for nearly free or free to end users, and they get public funds for that to make that possible. So that is the first choice, the revenue model. And then the second choice in online markets especially is how controlled the platform is in terms of what content is offered. This ranges from very open platforms where everybody can just write text and then upload it and offer it to the general public, to editorially strictly controlled platforms. Bookstores, traditional bookstores, are very editorially controlled. You cannot just walk from the street into a bookstore and put your own book there on the shelf and say, yeah, and if it gets sold, give me money. The bookstore decides which books will be offered, and they do a certain check. Are these legal copies? Did somebody not just make a copy down the road of this book? So the same with online markets. You have editorially strictly controlled media platforms. such as Netflix, which controls everything that is on their platform. And then on the other extreme, you have very open platforms, which are end user driven, like YouTube, where everybody can upload almost anything. Of course, there are certain checks on copyright now, and YouTube does some housekeeping of certain content that they don't like. They don't like erotic content. They don't want to become an erotic platform. They don't. They adhere to European rules also in terms of certain content that has to be removed because it's terrorist related or child abuse related. Evidently, very few platforms are completely open. But the piracy platform also falls under that. People just upload things without any editorial check. So if you have these two dimensions, you can combine this in 4 combinations. So you can either be a very open platform, like YouTube, and a third party pays, the advertiser, or you can be a very closed platform, like Netflix, like bookstores, and then you can have direct revenues, so the end user pays. These two combinations are the logical combinations. In media markets, companies tend to gravitate towards these two dominant models. Why? Because if you want to ask cash payment from the end user for media goods, you better do some editorial quality control check. If Netflix would be an open platform, it would happen a lot that you are constantly confronted with end user uploaded content that is a bit disappointing. And then after a while, people will stop paying their subscription. YouTube doesn't have this problem. People know it's for free, so the expectations are less high. The advertiser pays, and in exchange, they can look at it for free. But there are also two non-logical combinations, but they exist in the media world. You have very open platforms where everybody can upload, for the book industry's case, their fan fiction, for example, plus direct revenues. So the producer of the book uploads their book on a very open platform. It's like an open market. And then they try to earn direct revenues from the end users. This is the Patreon model, which exists online. Also, in terms of written content, Substack is really being very successful in creating an open platform where people try to earn direct revenues from the general population. This is an area where no fortunes are made, I have to say, and this is also an area which has historically always existed. Street musicians follow this model. They stand on the open street and they try to earn some money from the people who pass by. Again, you have winner-take-all effects there. You have a few superstars who can make a living, but most people actually cannot make a full-time living from this. The final combination, which is also rarer, is that you have very strictly controlled platforms in terms of content and indirect revenues. But in the video world, this is common in the private broadcasting. You can watch TV for free, but you have to sit through advertisings. And also public service broadcasting falls in this, the third party there being the government. So given this framework, how do publishers deal with this? There are 4 main questions that I think flow from this general framework of how media economies work. First of all, if you want to earn direct revenues from your book publishing, which is still your dominant model, you will need quality control. And I was happy to hear that the European legislation also aids the publishers in communicating with dominant platforms like Amazon to remove illegitimate content, to remove things that are not pirated. So there's an immediate next step, of course, in this discussion. You have these dominant models, but if there is a gatekeeper in concentrated markets, you need the cooperation from those dominant platforms that sell your books to help you monitor whether there are no pirated copies from your books on their platforms, and also the whole discussion on how many profit they take from your sale. And thirdly, in the book publishing, very well known, how high the rebates can be that these platforms give. We know that now in Europe there are fixed book prices in many European countries. That is an example of forcing a platform to allow the publisher to set their own prices, at least for a certain period of time. That is the first issue. You need quality control if you want to earn direct revenues. The second issue that emerges is if publishers want to work with fan fiction, and those people writing very enthusiastically new kinds of books based sometimes on existing characters. There's a lot of fan fiction based on Harry Potter, for example. How do book publishers allow this? And I would say, well, of course, these are open platforms, but some of the content will be promising. It will be very well written, or it will be very popular. So the second thing that publishers can learn here from these open platforms is you can pick and identify potential star writers, people who write very interesting fan fiction, and there have been examples of that. The 50 Shades of Grey books started like that as fan fiction. And B, publishers must be able to identify certain trends of genres that are popular on these platforms. So not necessarily picking up individual writers for a professional book publishing deal, where the writer then goes to the direct revenue model in a closed, editorially controlled environment. But just basically allowing the publishers to see which genres are popular amongst which ages, which other kind of identity markers, which gender, which nationality, which culture, which language. So data is very interesting in these open platforms. The third issue is that if you allow prosumers to participate in this world, how do you control this intellectual property wise? The next speaker will go deeper into these legal issues. I just want to mention that if you allow prosumers to rewrite fan fiction, you must have a procedure in place to allow them to reuse IP protected trademarks. And I personally plead that as long as no money is earned, if the fan fiction writer does it for free, they can reuse protected trademark property. The moment they start earning money from it, of course, then you can say this is not allowed, or we will only give you a little profit margin of it. But so you must have a procedure in place, and because the second part of the Möbius project is not only fan fiction platforms, but also enriched books, this issue of intellectual property quickly becomes very complicated if you allow fan fiction writers to also use pictures in their enriched book, or audio, music, or video. So if you have enriched books, the complexity accelerates because anyone versed in author rights and neighboring rights knows that these legislations vary from kind of media to kind of media. A director is a different kind of author than a composer. And then the anger with which these authors react when certain audio is used in their book also differs. And then you have collective author organizations, so it can become quickly very messy. Also, the legislation still varies from country to country, sometimes. So that is my third, almost a challenge, how to allow prosumers to participate with intellectual property. And my final challenge or thing I think we can think about is, I already mentioned it, if you allow people to earn money from their fan fiction, how do you share revenues, or how do you allow them to earn a little bit of money from this? So you have to decide under what conditions can they have some revenue margin. They did do an effort, and an argument can be made, and I heard it made by legal professionals, that even writers of fan fiction, although they reuse, for example, Harry Potter, do still produce an original work of fiction. It's their own words and they wrote it. So basically the authorship is up in the air there a bit. And you should be able to strike a deal with, if money is made, how are we going to share it so that we can work together and everybody is happy. So that is my framework that we also used in Möbius. And those were my 4 issues. Control for quality, if you want to earn direct revenues. Look at that pond of fan fiction writers and see whether you can fish in it or learn from it. Third, allow prosumers to participate in it. Allow them to reuse some intellectual property. And fourth, if money is made on those platforms, fan fiction platforms, make an easily understandable deal with the fan fiction writers on how much money, if any, they could earn based on sales. If a book deal comes out of it, it's more straightforward. If advertising revenues are collected from the platform, it is a bit more complicated. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Excellent, excellent. Very interesting and very systematic. And what I could say here is, if you have any question which are either directly to Olivier or related to what he said about business models and so on, you are invited to add them to the chat. And so basically to protocol them, and so we don't forget them after the next speakers. And we will come back to these questions in the chat when there is the general Q&A at the end of all the 3 contributions. So now I would like to give the floor to Quentin. He will certainly tie on up partly on what Mr. Skako said, but as Olivier has pointed out, there are more legal issues that are of interest. So please, Quentin.
Thank you, Christophe. Thanks for having me. So just as a reminder, I'm Quentin Chandelier. I'm the legal advisor at the Federation of European Publishers, which is the voice of the majority of publishers at European level. So my job is basically to keep track of what's happening in Brussels in terms of law, help lawmakers understand what publishers do as a business, as a sector, and ultimately try to encourage a EU legal framework that allows publishers to remain the successful cultural industry that it is. So what I'm going to explain in a way that is not too legal, I hope, is how publishers are in reality negatively impacted by some anti-competitive behaviors that you may find in some of the biggest platforms out there, and what has been done at EU level to answer this through the Digital Markets Act, in particular that Gianpaolo has already introduced a bit. So for the past decade, the European Union has been taking pride in describing itself as the world's first digital regulator, meaning that it's the EU is the first to define the rules and the standard that internet must follow, whether it's to protect your personal data with the GDPR regulation, or to protect copyright online with the new copyright directive. The Digital Markets Act, or the DMA as we call it in Brussels, is one of the European Union newest flagships in terms of platform regulation. It comes from the ambition of the EU to make sure that the big platform active in the EU follow European rules. In this case, when it comes to fair competition, and even if they are based outside of the EU. So if they have European users, they are covered by the DMA and also the DSA. The DMA and all these regulations are all very relevant for publishers, particularly because of one platform that you may have heard about, an online marketplace called Amazon. It's not the only platform that has problematic behaviors, but it's the most emblematic one and the most relevant one as far as the DMA is concerned. But before I go into the details of the DMA itself, I think it's important to understand why we came to need the DMA in the first place. So contrary to a popular belief, publishers have been digital for a very long time, actually. And it's precisely because of that publishers have been among the first to feel the rise of big platforms. Take Amazon. Amazon started in 1995 as a website where you could buy books online. And it was advertising itself as the Earth's biggest bookstore. The reason why Amazon started with books is because publishing as a sector was one of the few who already had back then in the 90s standardized identifiers and metadata and a wide network of distributors, which is very useful when you're trying to build a marketplace online. Something that is important to keep in mind when it comes to the relationship of between publishers and Amazon is the nature of this relationship. When you're doing business with a big online marketplace like Amazon, publishers do not sell the book themselves to consumers. It's Amazon who will order the books to publishers, and then Amazon will sell to the consumer directly these books, which means that Amazon is acting as a retailer of books. But these books will be offered to the public simultaneously to other books that booksellers are selling on Amazon Marketplace. And when you are a consumer, this is almost impossible to distinguish one book, what books it comes from bookseller, what book comes from a publisher, what books come from Amazon itself. So if you go on Amazon right now, you look for a book, you will find on the same page 3 types of books, each book based on a different relationship with Amazon. So you will have, let's take the easy case, the books that are sold by independent booksellers. So you have your brick and mortar bookseller who creates an account on Amazon Marketplace, sells his book, and then Amazon serves as a pure intermediary by just providing the marketplace platform. The second case is books that are being sold by Amazon itself, but published by a third-party publisher. And there, Amazon is acting as a retailer. And the third case is books that are sold and published by Amazon itself, with Amazon acting as both the seller and the publisher. And again, bear in mind that from the consumer point of view, there is no difference between these 3 types of books that are being proposed. They are not distinguishable from each other. So bearing in mind this situation, if you fast forward 25 years to nowadays, 2022, and even before, Amazon has become a dominant, if not the dominant actor in many book markets. It's a bad thing for publishers and the book chain in general because publishers, booksellers, we all thrive on diversity and a wide network of independent booksellers. Publishers, they want to have their books in as many places as possible and not to rely on a single actor. The problem is that now publishers and booksellers as well are stuck in a bit of vicious circle in the countries where Amazon is present. Why is that? Amazon has become unavoidable due to the market position it has acquired as a gateway to readers. So publishers have no choice but to do business with Amazon because that's where the market is, especially as there are less and less independent booksellers. But by doing so, by doing a lot of business with Amazon, they are reinforcing Amazon's dominance and they are weakening themselves because the less alternatives publishers have to sell their books, the less leverage they have in their negotiation with Amazon, who can then impose more and more abusive contractual clauses and bad practices. So to give you a concrete idea, when I'm talking about abusive clauses and practices, they are very numerous and various in nature. If you take them individually, they may look minor from the outside, but when you look at them in their globality, in the systematic way they are occurring, they actually amount to a form of death by 1,000 cuts for publishers. So the abuses, they can be logistical in nature. So for instance, Amazon imposing delivery deadlines that are physically impossible to fulfill for publishers. They can also return on a massive scale books that they order to publishers, but they return them to publishers in a state that makes it impossible for publishers to put again these books on the market. They're just too damaged, so they just have to destroy the books. It's also abusive and systematic financial penalties from Amazon, meaning that as soon as a publisher is infringing one of the small rules or one of the small many rules of Amazon, they get a financial penalties, and it's mounting layer by layer by layer to a point that Amazon is actually making these financial penalties part of its business model, and it's very hard to fight for publishers. Then you have the contractual abuses. For instance, something that Gianpaolo already mentioned is for instance, when publishers are being forbidden from selling their own ebooks to other booksellers at better or different conditions than the one given to Amazon, or even forbidding publishers from raising issues with public authorities by contract. And finally, you have the abuses that amount more to unfair competition, whether it's Amazon refusing to share data that are generated by the sale of books with the publishers of these books, or even using this data to give Amazon an advantage to sell their own books. So it's also, and if we take a more systemic approach, it's also Amazon that is refusing to make its popular e-reader, Kindle, compatible with non-Kindle ebooks. Why? Because they want, the interest of Amazon is to trap consumers in a silo that forces them to buy books only on Amazon, because any ebooks that people would buy outside of Amazon would not work on the Kindle. So as you understand, this situation, which is not limited to publishers, it's also important to say, it's a very difficult one. Which brings me finally to the European answer and the Digital Markets Act. So like Gianpaolo already explained in his keynote, competition is historically one of the big power of the EU, and the European Commission has used it time and time again against multiple companies, including platforms. So again, something that Gianpaolo mentioned, through a competition procedure, the Commission forced Amazon to temporarily stop using the so-called most favored nation clauses, MFN as we call them, in the ebook market. So those were the clauses that preventing publishers from selling their own books on to other booksellers at different conditions than those given to Amazon. And it was even to the point where publishers were not allowed to sell the books on their own website at different conditions than those given to Amazon. But following a competition case, that was temporarily forbidden from Amazon doing so. But there are two big problems when it comes to competition rules in the EU that makes them like not completely fit to fight market abuses from online platforms. First, you have a pretty high threshold before a practice can legally qualify as anti-competitive, meaning that most unfair practices are problematic enough to damage the markets, but not grave enough to prevent competition per se. And second problem, a competition case takes a very, very long time to reach its conclusion, meaning that by the time remedies are imposed by the Commission to stop the practice and correct the market, actually the market has been already damaged sometime beyond repair by the unfair practice. And so even if you correct it, there is no competition anymore. So those are the two big problems that led the Commission to try a different approach, which led to the Digital Markets Act that was adopted in July and will be applicable from next year. And the big innovation of the DMA, which is meant to not to replace competition rules, but to complement them, to complete them. And the big innovation is that the DMA introduced so-called ex-ante obligation. What it means is that you will no longer have to wait for the damage on the market to occur. The platforms that are covered by the DMA will be forbidden from doing a number of things, or on the contrary, forced to do other things. So the goal of the DMA is to prevent damage from occurring in the market in the first place, so that you don't have to fix them later through competition law. So concretely, what am I talking about when I'm talking, as far as the publishers are concerned, of course, because the DMA is a big piece of legislation with a lot of obligations that go beyond publishing. If I sum up, there are maybe 5 key obligations that will positively impact publishers in the future. First, I just mentioned the MFN clauses, so these clauses that prevent publishers from selling their books elsewhere than at Amazon's conditions. These clauses are now fully banned, meaning that Amazon won't be able to forbid publishers to sell their books at better conditions to other retailers. So before it was a temporary remedy, now it's definitive. That's the law. They can't impose that anymore. Second obligation that is interesting is that publishers will no longer be forbidden from raising issues with public authorities. So that's something that the contracts with Amazon can no longer do. Third thing that is a very important one is about the practice of self-preferencing. So what is self-preferencing? Is the practice of, for instance, Amazon artificially giving prominence to his own books when consumers are searching for a book. So meaning that if you're a consumer, you look for a book, the first results that are going to be given are the books sold by Amazon itself, published by Amazon itself, and then only the competitors. So this practice of self-preferencing, that's gone. They're not allowed to do it anymore. Fourth important one, this one relates to data. And before a few speakers said it was important. One of the problems is that publishers do not know who are the consumer, don't know who are their readers, so they lack the data. And so here the last part relates to data. Amazon will no longer be allowed to use the data that a book sales is generating. For instance, what is the profile of the buyer, what are the types of books that they are buying on Amazon, etc. So Amazon will not be allowed to use this data to give itself an advantage when competing with publishers, because that would be an unfair competition. And the final key obligation, key benefit of the DMA, still on data, is that Amazon will have the obligation to share this data with publishers if they request it. So a publisher will be able to ask Amazon, say, okay, I want to know who are the consumers who buy my books. What data do you have? What demographics? What kind of books are they interested in? Etc. etc. So the Amazon will have to share this data with publishers, which of course allows to better understand the market, adapt, etc. etc. And ultimately, so these are the 5 key obligations that will benefit in the DMA publishers. And something also that Gianpaolo mentioned, if these obligations are broken by Amazon, it's not meaningless. The platform could risk pretty high fines because they range from 1 to 20% of their worldwide annual turnover. And in the worst case scenario, meaning that if a platform shows systemic refusal to apply the DMA, it can even lead to the Commission, let's say, imposing structural remedies, so basically forcing a company to split between its different part of the business to stop competition abuses. So once I've said all that about the DMA, are publishers saved by the DMA? Is the situation perfect? We are in paradise and we can move on. Well, not exactly. I mean, the DMA provides a very useful obligation. It's great that it's there, but it doesn't fix everything. Sorry, it fixes many things. For starters, the DMA only applies to a very limited number of platforms. It is meant to apply only to the so-called gatekeepers, which are specifically designated by the Commission. So the European Commission, a lot of its work in the coming months will be to decide which online platforms are gatekeepers and so have to apply the DMA. And to be considered a gatekeeper, you have to be an online service that provides very specific services. You have to be a search engine, you have to be a social network, a marketplace, these sort of things. And you have then to fulfill a number of conditions that prove that you are very big and very entrenched in the European market. So that means that you must have at least 45 million users, active users per month in the EU. You must be present in at least 3 different member states, and you must have a turnover, an annual EU turnover of 7.5 billion euro for the past 3 years, or market capitalization of 75 billion euro. So it only concerns the biggest of the biggest online platforms. Amazon will almost certainly be among these gatekeepers, and so we'll have to respect all the obligations I mentioned that are part of the DMA. But again, the DMA will only cover a very limited number of platforms, the biggest of the biggest. The second issue, so to say, that makes the DMA not fit for everything is that the DMA only covers some of the abuses that publishers have to put up with when they're dealing with platforms, including Amazon. Like I mentioned, you have a lot of back office issues linked to logistics, to penalties. Those are outside of the scope of the DMA. The DMA is only meant to cover what is affecting the consumer to business, the consumer to platform issue, not the business to business part of it. So all the logistics issues, all the penalty issues, they remain still very much valid and very much problematic. Another thing that I mentioned, and that unfortunately we wish that the DMA would have gone a bit further on that, it's not the case, it's about interoperability. In the DMA, you have an interoperability obligation, but it's mostly for messaging apps, WhatsApp, messengers, this sort of things. We would have wanted the DMA to go further, to stop Amazon from making Kindle incompatible with non-Kindle products, because that's a big loss for consumers and for publishers as well. For consumers, of course, because I explained they can't read their ebooks on non-Kindle e-readers, on non-Kindle e-readers, and it's also a big loss for publishers, because actually publishers, when they're providing ebooks, by default, they are very often made in interoperable formats, because again, a publisher's interest is to have their books read on as many platforms, as many devices as they can. And here, Amazon is preventing that from happening for a purely commercial reason, because they have an interest in creating a silo. And the third and final challenge when it comes to the DMA is that it's going to be complicated and not burdensome, but very, very difficult to enforce. You can expect, of course, all the platforms that are part of the DMA to fight tooth and nails to limit the scope of the obligation, to try to do as little as possible. And both the European Commission and national authorities will need a lot of resources, a lot of time to make sure that the DMA is properly applied. And that's going to be one of the big challenge for the European Commission. And the European Commission is in the process of hiring a lot of people with specific knowledge to try to enforce the DSA and the DMA. So DSA is the Digital Services Act. It's more about content moderation. Sorry, it's beyond the scope of what I'm supposed to say. But yeah, a lot of resources would be necessary for the law to actually be more than nice words and actually have a concrete effect on the market and change the situation. But overall, just to conclude a bit, if we look at the DMA, so the Digital Markets Act, in its globality, publishers, we are seeing that as a very welcome intervention from the EU. It's a great thing and a great step forward. It became necessary because of the market effect of some of the biggest platforms out there that have become completely unavoidable. It was impossible for publishers to realistically refuse to do business with Amazon. But the DMA, unfortunately, doesn't solve all the issues, and it will require a lot of energy to be properly enforced and ultimately put publishers in a better situation than they are right now. But that's something that we, as FEP and all publishers around Europe, will strive to do in the coming years and to come. So yeah, that was pretty much it on my side to introduce a bit the DMA and the challenges around it. Where was clear.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Extremely interesting. And also very much put into different areas with some kind of evaluation and with an own perspective by the FEP. Extremely interesting. All the listeners, I would like to remind that if you have any particular questions to Quentin or to the issues raised by Quentin, you could enter them to the chat, and we will then take them up in the final Q&A round. Good. Now the question is, what can we, the publishers, Möbius, do on the one hand, this side of legislation, because there's subsidiarity, whatever publishers can do for themselves to stand up against platforms, that is a good thing. And secondly, given on the new legal framework of the DMA from next year, how can publishers use their forces, particular in the areas focused by Möbius, which is enhanced ebooks and also connected to collecting data about the use and the use of enhanced ebooks. A person that has occupied himself with that kind of a question, and if you put them to reality, it's mostly connected to technology, is Alexandro. And therefore, I would like to give Alexandro the floor. Alexandro, please.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, having heard now already about the business models, the different, let's say, options that are there, and having heard also about the new policy landscape that we have with the DMA, which is coming up, basically. I want, from my perspective as a computer scientist and someone working for a tech company, I want to bring the point of view of such an SME, if you wish, who is operating in this landscape, and to examine a bit, okay, what is the relationship actually between technology developers who are often such small or medium companies and platforms. Now, we have heard and we know that that there's a very complicated relationship here, and the norm, let's say, for a while has been this kind of move fast and break things, but this way of thinking maybe is not the most sustainable one. And when thinking about new technologies and solutions that that come up, this can be used in mainly two ways. They can be used to favor the dominant positions of those that already are gatekeepers, or they can try to help players escape that dominant positions of the large operators. Although I would argue that there's another aspect to consider, which is that new tech and solutions are often developed by small companies, yes. They often innovate in one specific aspect. So, for instance, let's say they look into really how to do better reading apps for consuming ebooks, and they use really great AI technology, for instance, for understanding, okay, what is the best type of typography and how much text can be displayed and which type of interactions are easiest for the user. So they really innovate in a really nice way on one specific topic, and they have a product and they rely either on organic growth, or maybe they make a successful crowdsourcing campaign and they attract financing in this way, but mostly they will seek investors, and thus in many cases the successful conclusion of the business is that they will be acquired by one of the big players, and this is a bit of an issue in itself, since in this way innovations that can help players escape these kind of large platforms, they get in a way let's say muted through this process. But nevertheless, it is important because of these different ways in which technology can be used. It is important for those that create such new disruptive products to already, when they design their product and start doing their minimum viable product, to already consider aspects of business model and of ethics. So in the case of Möbius, for instance, we wanted to tap into the potential of data, and here looking at data beyond what traditionally publishers have access to. And so we looked at data of that we can extract from online communities, more specifically prosumer communities. We, for instance, experimented with AI models that can predict works that will become very popular in the near future, based on previous history, based on large amounts of data of what has happened in that community previously. We have then adapted this model to, for instance, use it on tags to predict topics that will become popular. And this responds to this emerging need of publishers to identify trending content and topics, and to help understand the what readers and writers are interested in, and in specific markets even. and in this way to identify valuable content to be considered for publishing. In Möbius, we also modeled and analyzed communities based on graph theory. And in this way, we wanted to find out more about the, let's say, hidden properties that are there and about the dynamics of those communities. And we use these insights that I mentioned now to create interactive dashboards that publishers can access. And this is what Simona in her presentation mentioned as the prosumer intelligence toolkit. It's also what Olivier said in terms of the advice of fishing in the pond of fan fiction. So how do you find the right fish there? So there is, however, one critical risk that Christoph mentioned, which is that this kind of a toolkit is as useful and successful as the data that it feeds on. And access to data is really a big issue. Not all platforms are open for outside innovation. And even when this is the case, and let's say, as it's been until now, we don't know what's going to happen, the case for Twitter, where there are many applications and an API that supports the many applications in an ecosystem. You don't have the certainty as a developer of technology that things will stay the same and that you will be able to create your product and keep your product operating in the space. So it's a very high risk actually for tech companies that do such work and offer such products. And we have a similar case in our company actually, and we are aware of this. Now, I also want to speak about another type of technology and another type of innovation, that of the medium and the format. So for publishers specifically, and this is very interesting point because we envision in Möbius that digital books will become more than let's say a digital translation, if you wish, of this physical books that you have in your hand, which has been the case with ebooks mainly. We think that books can become more immersive, can provide immersive stories, and this can appeal better to the new generations that have grown accustomed to kind of a media-rich ecosystem, digital products, and so forth. So in Möbius, we experiment with the use of 3D audio and multimedia elements being added to the book. This is this kind of enhanced ebook that was that was previously mentioned, and we also examined ways in which the fan base can engage with the writers and the publishers, for instance, to source content from them. And this, of course, raises many challenges, the most difficult ones related to the management of rights, of course. Another big challenge that we have to face when trying to enable this new types of innovation is that we have to modify and extend existing standards like EPUB 3. So, for instance, to be able to support 3D audio. So, to, let's say, a bit bring things together from a technology perspective and a developer here, sometimes you feel a bit lost in this in-between world, and you have the different, let's say, directions in which you are being pulled, and you have to always try to create a bit of a balance between the different aspects and, well, focus as much as possible on disruptive innovation and innovation in general, while keeping aware basically of the context in which you would operate with such a solution. And I think I would like to give the floor now back to Christoph and open maybe for the next part of the workshop.
Thank you very much, Alexandru. That was really hands-on, and I think it is a very good combination to have to know that the legal framework will, even if it will not be optimal, be more favorable for publishers in the future on the one hand, and on the other hand, that there are ideas based on a systematic evaluation of different business models which actually see opportunities for publishers in the areas we have discussed about. Now you have the chance to ask questions in the chat about what Alexandru said and about the issues Alexandru has raised. Independently of that, I would like now to open the floor to questions either in the chat concerning single contributions or the whole thing we are talking about, or also to raise your hand and ask your question in audio. Well, that's always how it goes. I would be ready voluntarily to kick this off by a question on my own. It would be to Quentin. With the interoperability issue is very close to my heart because for the European and International Booksellers Federation, a colleague of mine and myself produced a report on the issue of interoperability, or better, non-interoperability in the ebook world. Why do you think that the interoperability part of the DMA is not stronger? Do you see any forces in the lawmaking process where there are people in which in the interest of which it is not to have more pressure in the direction of interoperability of ebooks?
Okay, thanks, Christoph. On this, the answer is pretty simple. I mean, when you discuss about interoperability to the Commission, to the Parliament, to the Council, you explain the issues that we face, publishers face with Amazon when it comes to interoperability, and they always are very sympathetic. They will say, "Oh yeah, okay, that's not normal. Indeed, I would like to." They are also consumers, so they're like, "Oh yeah, I would like to read my ebooks on outside of Kindle and all that." But then the problem is that you have a political reality. Especially when you're talking about files like the DMA, which are very, very large in terms of scope. There's a lot of political attention on that because, of course, we see that as publishers, but there's a lot of other interests, a lot of other industries that are impacted there. And then, unfortunately, it's a question of what are the policymakers considering as a political priority, what do they want to assess first, etc., etc. So in the specific case of interoperability, the answer that we were getting was, oh yes, indeed, we see that it can be a problem, but in the context of the DMA, well, it's maybe too soon. We need to further evaluation, and now the focus is mostly on messaging apps. So it's more a question of political priority than anyone sympathizing with the need for commercial silo from Amazon more than anything. But I haven't met anyone about interoperability who told me, oh yes, it's great that Kindle is preventing outside ebooks from being read. That's for sure.
That's is good to hear. Thank you very much. And for example, that probably means that you should go on pressing in this direction. Whatever. Well, let's see what's happening in the future. Now, Alexandru, please.
Yes, actually, in a way, related question to Quentin. I was very, let's say, happy to hear that the DMA has this stipulation of the obligation to provide and share data from these large platforms. And I was wondering if it's also specified in that this data should be shared in a, let's say, reusable or machine readable format, so that can actually be, let's say, used by the publishers. And I'm asking this because in previous, let's say, legislations where data sharing and interoperability actually have been stipulated, there was no mention of the format. And what platforms have done is that you receive a very, let's say, unusable selection of files, and it's really a hassle then to make something meaningful out of it.
Thanks for that. You putting me a bit on the spot because I'm sure that there is somewhere deep in the regulation. It's 100-page long, and so it's not exactly something that you want to read before going to bed, or you want to read it to fall asleep. But I'm sure that there is somewhere a reference about that, and you're right that it's something very, very concrete. So I can't unfortunately like direct you to specific provision of the DMA on that. I would have to dig into it, but here what would be my gut instinct is that if Amazon or another platform was to provide this data in a format that is not usable, that would be kind of bad faith, and I would expect then the commission or the public authority to come up at some point and say, okay, Amazon, you have to provide the data in a usable format, otherwise you're just killing the DFA util of the provision. So that if that's not directly in the DMA, that's typically the kind of thing that I imagine stakeholder dialogues with the commission or guides, the provided guidance provided by the commission or national authority would cover, because otherwise, what's the point of sharing the data if the data are not usable?
It's a bit of a worry I have, because sometimes these details are left out of such legislation, and this was a bit the case, unfortunately, with GDPR, where some of these things were not specified very clearly, and in the end, if you request your data from Facebook, I think it was that you receive a PDF with some things, so it's completely.
That's unfortunately, like when it comes to EU lawmaking, I say that because I used to work in the parliament, so I was on the other side of the desk as well. Sometimes, like indeed, you don't go in the technical, let's say the technical practicalities, because also you are at a EU level kind of legislation. You set up the big principle, the big regulation. You can't necessarily afford to go into the minutiae, the technical detail. That's more like something that the commission, that member state will do maybe at a later stage. But I completely hear your point and agree to it to an extent.
So thank you very much. Any more questions or contributions to the discussion around legal frameworks, business models, technological measures to give European publishers the chance to do something in sharing or for the prosumer role in the area of enhanced ebooks?
Well, I can, before people come up with questions, I can still add a little extra point to the discussion we just had about the sharing of data with the businesses who sell. Very often, the legislation avoids using technical language or really specifying it, because if you then show it to engineers, that it's always not the language they like. Also, if legislation is vague enough, for example, you force them to be interoperable, then usually Amazon could always, or Google, they can always invite 30 engineers who say, oh, this is not possible. This is so complicated. So the lawmaker tends to say, we don't care. We don't care about you engineers. Just figure it out. And actually, very often that is the better approach than to get hemmed into a technical discussion, where in the end, you know, you will lose, because you cannot have the same technical expertise as software engineers have, because the same discussion has already emerged on the interoperability between messenger systems and Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, that normally these systems should be able to talk. Engineers then immediately come up with why this is completely impossible. Also for group chats. But in the end, if you force them, they are smart enough, right? They are the geniuses from Silicon Valley. Actually, they can figure it out. They just don't want to. So that was my minor addition to this discussion.
Thank you. Then I may ask one more, which goes a little bit off the main topic, maybe also to Olivier. I have done a seminar with students this semester, and we want to have an overview about what there is with respect to enhanced ebooks on the German market. And the result was absolutely sobering. There's basically nothing. So the question would be, are you talking about a type of media which, for whatever reason, has not really started off, and why? Because we have been promised products like that since the mid-1990s.
Yeah, that's really it's a question about the market opportunity of enhanced books. As it happens, 10 years ago, we did a big research project where we looked at the opportunities of enhanced ebooks and the willingness to pay by consumers, on how much would they be willing to pay. Evidently, making these enhanced books is more expensive, even more expensive than making a physical book with text and or pictures. And there, 10 years ago, we predicted that the market opportunity for enhanced ebooks is small, and that the willingness to pay, that was the big hurdle, was not that much higher than it was for existing physical books printed on paper. So then already we advised the publishers, stick to your traditional business model, paper item, 20 euro per book. Maybe experiment with bundles, where if people bought the paper book, they can download a digital version, maybe for a very small amount of money, like €0.50, and vice versa. If people downloaded a digital book, offer them a physical version for at a certain price point. And there actually some money could be made, but that I haven't seen it yet in the market. But it's true, enhanced ebooks, I think the market there is captured by gaming. And the amount of money that people spend on entertainment and culture is limited to a certain amount in every population. And I think the people who are interested in dynamic ebooks are, a lot of them are already lost to immersive stories in games, and which reach a level of quality that is hard to imitate. But I'm sure there should be a market for it, for enhanced ebooks. But I think the prices of developing and making them should come down a bit still, and the willingness to pay in the market has to go up a bit.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening.
I have this one's additional speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
It's a bit disruptive, but we can hear you.
Okay, no, because speaking to this a little bit, we in Kunstkraftwerk, we are trying to approach this way of immersive vision. So making now, for example, the experiment to translate or interpret the books that we are doing for the visualization for the final project for this project. We are trying to enhance an idea of how immersivity can bring storytelling closer to the people, and out of that to make them vision into how visually and with immersive audio an experience of a story can be told. And doing this is a possibility, making it now in the full immersion in the installment of Kunstkraftwerk, which is a big immersive room, to put it in a smaller version in the book box, which is a 5 by 5 meter cube, to make an experiment how to make this possible in making it a portable version. So this is the second way of approach. The third way of approach is to bring a 360-degree film from the immersive experience into an immersive virtual reality 360 view to tell the story in a different way. And so this is the way we scale down this to more portable, more affordable, and multipliable possibility to recreate a new way of looking how literature or basically books or storytelling can be brought into. So this is the way I personally am looking forward to get into this direction, because in the end, the most virtual reality is still a book, because you can imagine by your own background what is written from the author, and you put together the story in your own imagination. And so this is what is a very important issue that I think that we should focus into. And of course, I'm not the one who speak about market or money making, because I'm trying to make the creative part with all the experts together. But thinking in a common sense in this Möbius project, I think we should think in a result which is going in this direction. Thank you for listening to my bad speaking, but that's good.
No, thank you. That was perfectly all right. And you're basically promoting an approach that says the better enhanced ebooks are, and the more creative, the
Yes.
better is the chance that they will start off as a product category. Clara, are there any questions in the chat we should address?
Not by the moment, thanks.
Okay, then Simona, I think we'll slowly go into the final meters.
Yes, exactly. So, Christoph, if you want to provide your thoughts, your wrap up, then I will do mine, and we can conclude the discussion. If you want, you go first.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would say that I have been really impressed by how much the different thoughts converged. That was like this in a much stronger measure than I would have expected. I can only adore the high level of reflection that can be seen in Möbius, all the way from thinking from the user, which means also business models and the financing via the legal framework, all the way to technological ideas that have the chance to give European publishers an opportunity to well, it's probably more than finding a niche, to survive at the side of the different platforms. The positive, well, say the advantages of which we have covered, and some of them will probably be retracted a bit by the Digital Market Act. So my summary will be a very positive one, and especially with respect to how the different contributions fitted.
Yeah, that's true. My impression is the same. We have touched some of the challenges that the publishing sector is experiencing. They are not all, it's not an exhaustive list, but they are the very relevant ones. So the balance between authorship and revenues, but also the dominant position of the platform and all the data access issue mentioned by our speakers, but I'm very happy that we also discuss in parallel opportunities. So both they are coming from the policy perspective or from research that brilliant mindset are putting together on a theoretical approach for new business model or tech solution to make
Now we have lost you. We have lost the last, say, 10 seconds. Sorry, Simona.
Okay. Yeah, so can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so it's a kind of interesting discussion when you talk about challenges, but you are also able to provide already some opportunities to overcome those challenges. And this is exactly what we are doing into the Möbius project. So if you feel free to get in touch with the project, and our deliverable will come. So we will let you know much more on our documents and reports in the upcoming months regarding all the aspects that we have touched today. So if we do not have other questions, I would like very much to thank all the speakers for the brilliant input, to Christoph Blasi for the moderation. It was very nice to have you here, Christoph, and a big thank to all the participants for listening us. Again, if you want to be in touch with us, you can check on the Möbius project. You will find the recording of the session today and much more material and content, also to get better overview about our real project results. And finally, let me also thank very much Clara Pont from Mobile World Capital. They are the dissemination and communication leader in the project, and Clara organized all the meetings and make it possible. So thank you, Clara, very much. And thank you all. I wish you a very nice afternoon, and with 5 minutes and something more in advance, we can say that we will be in touch very soon. Goodbye, everyone.